The Fossores Chapter House is the world's first headquarters for Christian ministerial innovation, bringing preachers, leaders, and innovators together to collaborate on new liturgies, resources, and responses to the challenge of our times. This podcast explores the ever-changing era of perpetual upheaval, in which effective ministry requires constant imagination, creativity, and change. Well, hey everybody, thanks for joining us again on the Chapter House podcast. I'm here with my good friend Kaye Kolde, the lead pastor at Arbor Free Methodist Church. Why don't you say hi, Kaye?
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here with Dave.
Yeah, this is good. It's super fun. And normally we have two guests today. It's just Kaye and I for a conversation about women in ministry. And because the Chapter House podcast focuses specifically on innovation in Christian ministry, we want to talk about the increasing prominence of women in ministry and what kind of ministerial innovation reveals itself through gender equality and representation. And then we also want to talk about how women can innovate. So we're not just going to advocate for women. We also want to have a frank conversation, a helpful conversation, both from a woman and from a strong advocate for women in ministry for how women can move forward. So, yeah.
I think the realization that just hit me was we have one woman on the podcast with you today because there's still not enough women in ministry.
yeah, that's very true. To be fair, I have had many female guests who are in ministry up to this point, but I feel bad when I double dip and go back to the same people. And then I have two good friends that were going to be with us today that both had to bow out last minute. So
yeah, I'm just messing with you.
No, you're not.
Yes.
You know? Kaye doesn't think I like women. That's how we're getting started.
Not true. I think we met because you and your board wanted to reach out to welcome me, in part because I was a woman stepping into a place where they had never had a woman leader before. Yeah,
I think it was Becky Veit at the time, one of our female former staff members, former elders at Westwinds, good friend of mine, but she'd heard, to put it gently, that you're getting your ass kicked. And so we thought, this is terrible. We want to, as a family, we want to reach out to you and say we love you and welcome to town and welcome to ministry.
And that was really, really cool. I appreciated it, but that's how we started talking.
So we became buddies, Yeah. And so why don't you catch us up to speed then? Tell us a little bit about your story insofar as you're comfortable. I know you'll be more circumspect than I would be. So.
Okay, so my story. Well, I didn't grow up in the church. So in terms of women in ministry, I had no really preconceived notions about what that looked like. Although my parents were brought up in religious homes, Eastern Orthodox and Catholic, so there were no, women in leadership roles in the, unless you count what nuns really do.
Yeah, I actually don't know what nuns do. Every time I see them in a movie, I go, what do they, I don't know what they do. What do they do?
Yeah, that's like saying pastors in movies just like dust the sanctuary and rearrange flowers on the piano or something.
The guy from Seventh Heaven or whatever.
But anyway, so I had really no thoughts about women in ministry and no thoughts about Jesus at all until I was in my early 20s, and then came to faith, and we were in a Reformed church, and it was not affirming of women in pastoral ministry at all. And so as I was taught and discipled, that was just not a part of pastoral ministry. I never thought about it. And then eventually we ended up in a Free Methodist church, which is a pretty small denomination. And that particular church had never had a woman leader in it either. So the first time that I heard women pastors come in to preach, they were missionaries, number one. So that's always a box that people can put women in acceptably, which eventually someone pointed out to me how potentially racist that is. Like, as white Americans were okay with women being the ones who preach the gospel to other countries and other people, but not to our people.
Yes. That's funny. I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah, that's definitely something you'll read in some of the...
No, like somebody's going to defend that, or that's a criticism that people...
That's a common criticism, that it's racist because we don't accept it for, the dominant culture Americans, but we do accept it if you're going to some other country and some other people group. It's okay.
That's funny. No,
and I would say that was kind of true in my local context. It's nothing that the Free Methodist Church would have ever said yes to, but it was kind of true in my local context. And so as I just started getting more serious about, oh, if I'm going to follow Jesus, that probably means I should ask him what he wants me to do with my life. And there was just, like increasing levels of surrender to what that meant. And so as I was surrendering, I was also discovering gifts for teaching, and that put me in circumstances where, oh, am I going to be speaking to men and women in the same room? And how do people feel about that?
Did you have to wrestle theologically yourself about whether or not that was okay?
I did, because when I was first taught and discipled, it was all in context where it was not acceptable and it was unbiblical.
Right.
And then I went through some of those different levels of leadership where it's like, oh, I'm teaching kind of a Sunday school class to men and women, and some men aren't okay with that. And then I'm like at different levels of what the church considered having authority, it was questioned. And so then when I went into the process of ordination,
and then this is all in a Free Methodist church, right? Which is historically a big advocate for women ministry.
Absolutely. I mean, since its founding in the 1860s.
Right, P.T. Roberts and his wife sort of co-founded the denomination.
Yes.
And she was a very prominent person, and he articulated heavily the biblical defense for women in ministry.
Wrote a great book on ordaining women. In the 19th century. So I always tell people it is pre-20th century, feminism that you associate. Like those who don't condone women in ministry, they often associate it with, the feminism of the...
okay, like it's a fad.
Yeah, like the 1960s and 70s kind of created that. And then the 80s and 90s reacted appropriately by, like nipping that in the bud. And in many denominations, even ones that had women pastors, actually revoked the opportunity for women to be ordained in that period of time. So
really, I hadn't heard anything.
Yeah, EV free is
really there are no women now. The term is complementarian, right? When women are not allowed, or there's a more misogynistic version where they're not allowed to speak or walk on their hind legs or whatever. But I think the more common version is complementarian, where women have to follow. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, all of these things started to kind of just come to me as I started more and more to use the gifts that I was realizing God had given me for the sake of the body. And then I felt called to ordination, but I thought, no, I'll just go. We have an ordained diaconate that you could get into. And I thought, I'll just do that because that won't, my big reason for not pursuing pastoral ministry and that leadership was because it might create division in the body. That was always the thing that was said to me and the thing that I received. Like, okay, whether I think it's right or not, I don't want to create division. And disunity by doing this. And so I just kept dancing around it for a few years and really wrestling with it. And I was reading so many different books and trying to figure out theologically what I understood. And there was a point, year after year, in January, I was doing these 40-day partial fasts and prayer focus, and it was like 3 years in a row that this whole thing of not really surrendering to God's call in my life was part of that. And then I kind of had this vision of chasing my own tail. Like I just couldn't come to a place of settled peace. And the Lord finally said, if you don't step forward into pastoral ordination, you're being disobedient. And I went, oh, okay, well, I guess.
Since you put it like that.
Like disobedient. Well, then I'm going to stop trying to theologically understand right now. I'm just going to do what I hear the Lord telling me to do. I actually stopped reading everything because it's like, of course, you can justify the yes and the no from Scripture, like so many other things. And so I just felt like I had to have the courage to step forward, even if people were going to reject that. And some of the people that rejected that were in our family. And so that was really... In
your church family or in your bio family, like your extended family?
In my family, my in-laws. So who are really like my spiritual parents.
Oh, wow.
And it was painful, and there were
Yeah.
some really hard conversations, and then it created some conflict with my husband and
Sure.
my father-in-law. And so just a lot of times that were really challenging for me to say, is this really what I'm supposed to do? Is this really worth it?
Yeah, right.
Because I never wanted to be like the poster child for women in ministry. I did not feel like I was carrying some kind of banner for women.
Right.
It was really like, I want to be obedient to God, and I want to use the gifts that he gave me for the sake of his body.
You know, can I just say, I'm so glad to hear that part of your story, because I think there's a call of God upon the life of my daughter to be in ministry. And of course, you know, that's for her to sort out, you know, and that's kind of my dad's sense. And I could be projecting, you know, right? But one of my dad fears is that growing up in the Midwest, which is so theologically conservative, is that she's gonna fall in love with and or marry a complementarian who puts her in a box, who speaks against the voice of God and the calling of God's Holy Spirit on my daughter, and she's going to have to wrestle with, is this worth family conflict? So I'm so glad that you shared that part of your story, and that you decided it was worth it, because maybe it's just an imaginary fear, but I bet you there's somebody else's daughter out there who's
Right.
having to have the same argument, who's having to have the same debate. You know?
One of my best friends, her daughter's first serious boyfriend of a couple of years, it was that kind of a story. Like,
Yeah.
so my friend is ordained.
Yeah.
Her daughter obviously
Yeah.
believes that, you know, an egalitarian ministry and marriage. And so when she started dating this guy, it was kind of a big
deal.
constant, like this just low grade hum that was always there in terms of really
Right.
being excited about the relationship. So it was just that my own daughter would never date someone who wasn't okay with it.
Yeah.
She's pretty outspoken about it. But my husband, I mean,
Sure.
he had
Right.
he had just hadn't really thought about it or considered it. And then he definitely did not sign up to marry a pastor.
Right.
Definitely.
Right.
And I think that's one of those interesting things that we look at women and we say, like, oh, they had that sense that they were called to be a pastor's wife when they were in college or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, really interesting. You're called to be a pastor's wife. I have yet to meet a man who said, I'm called to be a pastor's husband.
I would tell you, because I train a lot of pastors. I work in different seminaries. I consult with different denominations, and I tell you, the sense of being unpleasantly surprised among husbands whose wives go into ministry is huge.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear you talk more about that, because probably the number one thing I hear from women in ministry is that, and they would never say it like this, but certainly what I hear is they're almost punished at home for that. The sense that, like, there's a low grade frustration that they work these kind of hours, or that they have this kind of ambition, or they have this kind of passion. There's a sense in which the husbands will ask of the wives, how can you leave our family so much, in the way that some wives ask of their husbands when their husbands are in ministry, but far fewer. So what were some of those tension points, and then how did you, and Dave's your husband, right? How did you and Dave work through it?
Yeah, I think timing for me was easier than some other women who know this call in their life from a young age.
Yeah.
In terms of family conflict, the timing worked out easier for me.
Right.
Because by the time I was ready to really be in full-time ministry, my kids were somewhat older.
Oh, sure.
And so it
it's
was
not like
easier.
they were in diapers, or you didn't have to make them lunches.
Right.
And, yeah.
Well, I could have, but I didn't. They were all contributing, that's for sure. And I think my kids knew the cost of ministry on a family, just like yours would.
Yeah.
But not from that little bitty baby age.
Right.
And occasionally I get some questions from women who say, how did you do this? And I say, I didn't do it when I was having babies.
Yeah.
And so it would be incredibly challenging. And
Sure.
I could see more stress on a marriage relationship because, when you have your kids, you're navigating who's doing what for the kids, no matter what your jobs are, what your vocations are. So to then add to that new navigation of the responsibility, the fact that you're doing it for the church. And I've heard a lot of, I've heard some women say that one of the struggles too is we all say you're supposed to love Jesus most and then your spouse, but for women who are pastors and their husbands, it can feel incredibly obvious. Like, oh wow, you really do love Jesus first and then me.
That's amazing.
And somehow I think women take that better when their husband's the pastor than when, the husbands are realizing.
Maybe they don't have as many models of it. I mean, I think that increasingly, I think it takes a remarkably strong, confident, healthy, masculine man to have an alpha female for a wife in ministry. And I have such tremendous regard for that.
Well, what's interesting in our relationship, we're both leaders. Yeah. I mean, he is, and I would say he's the more high D personality. He's the more dominant. I'm the more influencer. So he's never felt run over by me by any means.
Right. He's a doctor, right? So it's not like he's bagging groceries and
I think that has made it easier here in this church. People they're not going, gosh, well, what's he going to do? Because we know what our pastors' wives have always done.
Oh, right.
He's a physician, so it's he's busy. He's got things of his own to be doing.
Why isn't he leading the choir? Why isn't he playing piano?
Good Lord.
Putting on the potluck.
We'd be dismissed immediately if either of us led the choir. But so I would say for us, the process, partly because once I got into the process and I finally said yes, I did experience some opposition and I did experience some of those things that make some women bitter about it and had some really painful times. And interestingly, one of the leaders that I served under, he has now left our denomination for a complementarian denomination.
Oh, really?
And so it's kind of like, it all makes sense.
Yeah, sure. You can see where some of the tensions
right.
were. I do think, and there's historically there's a theological term called adiaphora, and it's a Greek word that means things indifferent, and it refers to things indifferent to our salvation. And it's a way that we talk about theological differences. Or basically areas that we can agree to disagree upon. Like I still think someone's a Christian, even if they don't agree with every single thing that I think biblically. Right. And those are the adiaphora. And I really do think that this issue of women ordination is adiaphora. You can be a complementarian and absolutely be a full, Jesus-loving Christian. But I also think it's a really important issue, and I really think the other side is wrong. I mean, deeply wrong. I don't think they're sinfully wrong. I don't think that they're hateful. I really, for all my jokes, and it is fun to joke, I don't think they're misogynistic. I just think they were really malformed. Yeah, maybe some of them, absolutely, sure. Just like some egalitarians are kooky and don't take the Bible seriously. There's some complementarians that are hateful or whatever. But I do think it's a real horrible misreading of Scripture to limit women. And if, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the arguments, there are what we refer to as two limiting passages, both in the New Testament, both in the writings of Paul, that at first blush seem to limit the public role of women in ministry. Don't permit a woman to have authority over a man. Don't permit a woman to speak in public. Those are the two passages. And when you read those, at first glance, you go, yeah, okay, that seems like women aren't supposed to be allowed to do that. However, if you look at the whole corpus, the whole canonical witness of Scripture, then you ask the question, what did women do? You find out that women led, like Deborah. You find out that women prophesied, like Philip's daughters, like Deborah, like Miriam, like Huldah. You find out that women were leading early churches, that women were teaching. You think of Priscilla and Aquila. You think of Lydia. I mean, there's so many examples. So either all of those women in the Bible that the Bible supports are somehow in violation of the Bible, or maybe there's a possibility we've misunderstood Paul's intent in these two verses out of the 60,000, which is of course where I land, and then it's really hard to look at any church and even complementarian churches and imagine what they would be like if women weren't doing anything. I mean, if women weren't leading, whatever term you call it, because they have all kinds of fancy terms, it's not really leadership. They're just the ones who coordinate. And they're just the ones who divvy up the work. And they're just the ones who cast vision. And they're not leading, though. I mean, whatever term you call it, if you took out all the women in leadership from even our most conservative churches, they wouldn't be there. They just wouldn't be functioning. And then, historically, look at the incredible women that we have. Amy Semple McPherson, who founded the Foursquare Church in the 20th century in Los Angeles. You think historically about people like Teresa of Avila. Who's the other one I'm thinking of that has all the funny supernatural ecstatic experiences? It'll come to me. But, there's... Even in the catacombs in Rome, when I went on a sabbatical a few years ago, in the 3rd century, there's a fresco, like just outside of the Vatican, that shows a female pastor administering the Eucharist. And so we have historical evidence that within 3 centuries of the resurrection, women in the Catholic Church tradition, which does not currently ordain women, we're at the highest levels of priestly function. So, I mean, historically, it doesn't wash to limit women. Biblically, it doesn't wash to limit women. So practically, functionally, it doesn't wash to limit women. So that's why, for me, it seems like such a ridiculous issue. But I try and be gracious and don't really do a good job with that. But I'm trying.
Well, and it goes all the way back to creation for the people who support it, right? They look in Genesis and they would rather read out of a King James translation that says, a suitable help meet. Like you're the helper. Yeah. And I feel like a very quick reading of the Old Testament, and you see that that word for helper is used most often, like 18 out of 21 times for the Lord himself. Yeah. So it's hard to say that word would designate some kind of subservient status, weaker, less able, to us. Less able to have authority, less capable of leading. Now,
I was reading in the book escapes me. Maybe I'll put it in the comments on the podcast. But this was fascinating. I'd never heard this before. But I was reading a contemporary rabbi currently living in Jerusalem, who said actually the best rendering of Ezer, the word that you're talking about, the helper suitable unto himself, is how we typically translate it. Is what's that?
Have you seen that one? That it's face to face, the rendering. I've seen that from a rabbi.
No, he says that it's actually a helper against himself. It's a sparring partner. It's somebody to check your blind spots, somebody to help you think around corners. It's literally a partner. But that sense in which the person is there to call BS on you, I go, well, that makes way more sense. I mean,
that seems like marriage.
That's right. That's every male-female relationship on the planet, backwards and forwards through time. Yeah. So. Yeah. Well,
so I had just recently read that idea of face to face, the suitable part for helper, so that sparring partner, that you're face to face with that person. It is a much different picture than what gets presented to so many people that impacts then, well, this is just how women were at creation. They were inferior. And then, well, what does it mean she was taken from Adam's rib, and this, it's all this rationale that gets born out of a bad translation in the first place.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the whole hierarchical argument is very strange to me. Doesn't quite hold.
And I know there are lots of people that can go with egalitarian leadership in a church, but not in a marriage. And there are different passages then that you're looking at and dealing with. And so there's all sorts of ways that I think we come to
your husbands, and that's what you're talking about, Ephesians 45.
And I think the really contentious piece of that is the head or the source, because when you
the kephale,
if you translate it as source instead of the head in terms of head, authoritarian head, it's different than the source as in creation. Yeah.
But I think, in that passage in particular, the idea is that wives are supposed to submit to their husbands. I mean, that's in there. That's clear. But that husbands are meant to love their wives like Christ loved the church. And I always thought, if you stop reading it submission, you come around with a really one-sided relationship. The guy's in charge, you'll do what I say because you got to submit. But if you understand how Christ loved the church, Christ died for the church. So show me a husband who's willing to die to his own
Pretty
desires.
high level of submission.
Right, yeah. Show me a husband who's willing to die to his own preferences, and I'll show you a wife who's ready to submit. Because that kind of love inspires devotion.
Sure.
And it's a reciprocal relationship that, again, I just don't see. It takes a very weak man to fall back on those submission passages as a way to justify why they should be in charge.
Well, again, the way most people learn the Bible, not people who are reading it in the original language, but when they are learning the Bible, the translation and the subheadings and the way that they even break that passage, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Right.
And then this long sentence that in our translation doesn't look like one sentence, and they take that verse out of that subheading on marriage. And so it looks like two totally different concepts when in reality it was presented as one, and it all begins with submit to one another, not wives submit to your husbands.
I do think it's best practice if you want to correctly interpret the scripture, or if you want to more correctly interpret the scripture, because nobody's got a perfect interpretation of the whole Bible. I mean, we're all a work in progress. Our understanding is all growing. But the best practice, I really think, is to read, especially the epistles, in their entirety, preferably out loud. Because that's how they were transmitted to the churches early on. And all of those, including the book of Revelation, those books are a very different experience to be, again, consumed in their entirety, because all those little bumps and bruises get leveled out as opposed to, zeroing in the microscope on one word or one context, So to hear them in large, and then they're a very different experience to be heard. A very different experience to be heard rather than just read. And in the epistles in particular, we never quote the first 20 verses or the last 20 verses of any of the epistles, because we just think, well, this doesn't help. I can't apply it right away. All that stuff about love and identity, that's all just hogwash. Get to the sins that someone else shouldn't do.
What are the rules in the doctrine that I need?
Exactly. And I go, well, no wonder we think Paul's a goof. Just we take out all this humanity and just zero in on what kind of polity he wants us to have, and a very skewed understanding of the Bible as a result. Sorry, there's me and all my rants.
Yeah. Here we go.
So when you came to Michigan, you were the first female lead pastor of the church we're at now.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a great church. I mean, the church has been a fantastic church, a huge support to our community, a beacon.
152 years old.
Yeah. Well, that's how old I feel after COVID. I feel like I've been pastoring for 152 years.
Yeah, I keep joking I'm going to have like the first term president comparison. Like when you see like Barack Obama in 2012 and 2016, like he's youthful and then he's suddenly gray and like wrinkly looking. That's how I feel after just 18 months.
I'm going to be translucent. I can't get any grayer. I'm going to be see-through, like parchment paper or something. So, but even though it was a great church, and even though it's surrounded by great people and a great community, there's some challenges coming in as a woman, right? For the first time.
Yeah. So some of that happened before I ever got there, which is nice, the attrition of people who didn't want to give that a try. And a lot of one of the things that's interesting, the Free Methodist Church in Southern Michigan is deeply rooted. It's old here, and there are tons of them. So compared to the Northwest where I came from, where they're much more dispersed, there are a lot of Free Methodist churches. And so people here think they are the most Free Methodist of Free Methodist people that there are. And yet they were not okay with women lead pastors. And it's like, well, really, this has been a part of who we are since the 1860s. So you're missing something about who we are and what our distinctives are, and the freedom for all people to minister, and their giftedness is one of the essential freedoms of the denomination. So it was kind of an eye-opener for me and for some other people, but I do feel like I've had some conversations, and definitely with some very sweet older people who will say, well, my buddy didn't think it was going to be right, but now he's okay with it. They all tell on each other.
I was always open-minded, but my friend, he's had a problem.
They all tell on each other. And I think, interestingly, and this can happen in a larger church with a lead pastor, but I think that most of the evaluation comes based on my preaching.
Yep.
As opposed to what kind of leader am I?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of them just don't know because they just listen to me on Sundays.
Yeah, right. Well, especially now, because the things that we're leading are so much more invisible than they used to be.
Yeah. So, you know, the evaluation really came on preaching, and I don't know. I don't preach like a girl, whatever that means. So,
I don't know what that means either.
Yeah, right. Just teach the word and be inspired by the Spirit and bring love and passion. And I think it's all good. You know, I do think women preachers get evaluated on a lot of things that men do not. And so that's an extra hurdle for a lot of women, especially if you want to be in a larger church where people are much more critical of the preaching, you know, like...
Yeah, it's a celebrity culture, even if you're not much of a celebrity.
Yep.
Once your church is about 300 people, once the church is about 250, 300 people, they start evaluating the person on the stage as a celebrity. Even though they don't warrant a giant celebrity, even though they know him, you're like at the very least you're a local news weatherman or something. I mean, that's kind of how they treat you.
I'm gonna keep that in mind. Thanks. Yeah. That's encouraging.
Well, one of my students, I think this was so funny. Jamel, she was a preaching student, a black gal, a lead pastor, and she was talking all the time about the fact that everybody was evaluating her shoes. That's all they would talk about was what shoes she wore. So if she wore Steve Madden's, I was like, actually, those are pretty sweet. I like those shoes. Or if she wore red heels, she said it was a big kerfluffle one day. She wore red heels, and I was like, this is hilarious. I don't know that sometimes people come up to me and say, I like your shoes, but I've never had anybody like be worked up about my shoes, which like Jamel was describing, which I just thought was so weird, and I wasn't sure if that was a cultural thing or an ethnic thing, but she was like, nope, no. that's a girl thing, that's a chick thing. 100%.
Oh yeah, and it used to drive me crazy at my last church, especially. You like preach your heart out, and then someone comes up to you at the end, and you're like, oh, I'm going to have some meaningful conversation. And they either have something negative or positive to say about your shoes. Yeah. One time I had an old guy come up to me, and he just looked at me, and I thought, I have I couldn't read him at all.
What's going to happen?
I couldn't read him. And he said, I think you're going to break your ankle on those shoes. I was wearing kind of platforms, a little bit like high heel platform shoes. And I just went, thank you for your concern.
Like, what am I supposed to say?
Yeah. Bless you. Oh, yeah. So I think what you wear...
It plays into it.
When I was sometimes not the female on the platform, other people would come to me because I'm the appropriate one to tell, I think that woman on the platform, her sweater's too tight. Yeah. Or what, and you're just
I find that
unless we're all gonna wear robes, like women have different bodies than men. Like you just have to get past the fact that she has a shape.
Sure, I find because I'm not especially conservative. I know that's a big surprise to anybody listening, but I there have been probably a handful of times where somebody usually on the music team, is wearing something that I go like, okay, I'm not a prude, but that's a lot right now. And then I don't know what to do. Like if it's an employee, I'm like, how am I going to talk to a female employee about what they're wearing without feeling like a pervert and then getting sued? And then if it's a parishioner, then I'm like, oh. So those are always off. So in all fairness, I probably would have come to you and said, okay, can you please go talk to that person and tell them to, put on a parka or something, or at least, not only wear a belt.
But sometimes they were absurd ones. Like these are completely fine things for people. Sure. And I'm more conservative on a platform than anywhere else in my life because I don't want that to be a distraction. Yeah, right. And so when I look at women and go, yeah, they're fine, you just either you have a problem.
Right, yeah. You're the dirty pervert.
Right. Yeah. Or you need to understand that women, they just have...
Yeah, we're not going to put them up there.
Women have breasts, and she's not in tight, revealing clothes. It just, you have to get past it.
She's not up there in clear heels and a leopard print.
That could be cool. I don't know.
Maybe we were thinking of different leopard print.
I think so. I have leopard print heels.
Yeah. I was thinking the leather micro mini was really what I was going
that's probably not the right choice. But so what you wear, your voice, which is another challenge for women, and in preaching classes and things like that, women can get just railed on for their voices, and that
like what kind of,
just like you don't have an authoritative voice, you have this, like your voice is too high, your voice is too soft, your voice is like, you can hear it right now, I haven't had that problem. So fortunately for me, I have a deeper, loud voice, and so I don't get that. But a lot of women encounter that in criticism of their preaching, and it's just like, this is the voice that God gave them, and you can do certain things to create a better sense of authority, but you can't genetically alter your voice.
Yeah, no, I'm evaluating my own coaching to female preachers over the years, because I had this very gifted student, very gifted preacher and writer. I mean, she was fantastic, but when she would preach, her voice would shake. You could hear it quavering. And I would go back and I would say to her, like, I'm not sure, like, I don't think this has anything to do with your gender. I think this is nerves. And she'd go, but I don't feel nervous. I feel great. I'm like, well, then whatever's going on, we got to address this thing, because this is a massive detractor from the performance of your preaching. I mean, it just sounds like you're going to cry, which is really hard to listen to somebody tell a joke if you think they're going to cry.
Right.
Or it's really hard to listen to them talk about God's requirement for us to be bold and courageous if you think they might run off the stage, and need a Kleenex. I mean, the juxtaposition is so big.
Absolutely.
And preaching has to be good theater. I mean, preaching has to command the attention of an audience. And I wonder, with that in mind, I wonder if female comedians are paving the way for female preachers to look different and sound different and be more comfortable. Because you think about, beginning with maybe Tina Fey. I mean, Tina Fey's gorgeous, and she gets up there and she looks like $1 million. And Tessa Tomlinson is one that my wife and I like. Yeah, she's like 20 years old. She's a knockout. She's supermodel pretty and gets up there and in fancy clothes and is hilarious.
That's an advantage, though. Because to be the unattractive homely woman preacher, you get way more criticism than a guy who's maybe not some hot guy. I absolutely.
Really? I would think that.
I just think all around your looks are evaluated so much more than men. People just get used to like the man and in the pulpit, on the platform, whatever. But with women, there's just a lot of evaluation of all that stuff: your clothes, your shoes, your body, your voice, your hair. I've had guys on sound crews tell me multiple times, I'm so tired of it. If you had just cut all your hair off, we would never have to worry about that mic moving around. And it's like, you know what? Really? You're going to have to work it out, because I'm not going to cut all my hair off so that, like things like that. And about, women joke all the time about where you put your mic pack if you don't wear pants.
Yes, this is a common thing. It's like if you're in slacks and or if you're wearing a skirt, or if you're in a dress. So
women joke about it with each other, but when like a guy or a sound crew guy makes snide comments about it, then women are kind of a little bit feisty about it.
Over it.
But then I think also we're very, very accustomed to men making illustrations using sports and militaristic image and all this stuff that we would associate with being masculine, and we just expect that women in the congregation are fine with that. But when women might make some kind of illustration about like childbirth or some other thing, like
there's more chafing there.
It's all of a sudden like, why are you being so feminine? And it's like and that's probably not me, because I'm not very feminine in those ways. Like, I'm never the woman that's going to talk about crafting, that's for sure.
That's funny.
But I have heard that from other women that
I think the best,
to.
And I want to talk about mistakes that women make too, so if we can be helpful in trying to develop them. But I do think that's one huge thing that I always encourage other ministers is to find out, like, whatever the thing is that's you, speak from the center of who you are. Find your own voice, find your own rhythm, find your own cadence, find your own authority, be confident in who you are, and then speak from that center. And so if you're, I mean, most of the women in my life are not especially girly. So I go, but they're still going to like things that maybe other people don't like, so speak about your illustrations as being a teacher, or speak about your illustrations as being somebody who loves to bake deluxe, over the top ridiculous cakes as a way to spoil your friends. Speak from whatever those things are. And I think the more authentic you are, the more authority you have, regardless of the relative maleness or femaleness of the image. And even with something like childbirth, I've seen 6 or 7 different female preachers in our circle who've used childbirth as an illustration, but they come at it with such power and provocation that the illustration is secondary to the sort of torrent of Holy Ghost activity coming out of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that if I could wave a magic wand that I would help more women in ministry understand, is that once you're called into ministry, once you step forward in it, don't focus so much on being a woman. Focus on being in ministry. Like, if you're already in ministry, like, you've already won. Like, you might have people who make stupid comments from time to time, but don't feed the trolls. Like, don't engage them. If you're already in ministry, if you're already ordained, you don't need to read extensively more books about being a woman in ministry. You just need to read about being in ministry. And one of the things that drives me crazy, because I'm looking to elevate women. I want women around me. I want to celebrate women. And one of the things that drives me nuts is if I get somebody and I give them a platform, I give them a microphone, I give them a leadership shot, and I'm like, all right, here we go. You're getting a shot that maybe you don't even deserve, because I believe in the validity of this cause. Like, here we go. And they spend all their energy telling me why they deserve this shot because they're a woman. And I go, like, I know. Shut up. Let's keep going. Like, let's do the things now instead of talking about why it's so important that you get to do the things. Let's do them. And I wish that wasn't as common. But man, in my experience, again, as a celebrator, as an advocate, as an ally, boy, do I run into that a lot, of people who just want to keep telling me that they're worthy after I've already said yes, and here you go. Let's do the things now instead of focus on it.
I don't know if you ever heard, there was at one point this thing going around online from Francis Chan about stop telling everybody you're persecuted. Like, everybody hates you at work because you're a Christian.
Yeah.
Everybody hates you at work because you're a jerk.
Yeah, right. Everybody hates you because you're a goof. Yeah.
And I think sometimes there are women in ministry, like, I can identify some in my mind right now, who think it's always because, like, they're persecuted as a woman in ministry. Right. And it's like, I think it's more because your personality is really difficult, or I think it's more because you're not as gifted as you think you are.
Yeah. That's a big one.
And so there's that piece of it, right? Like, someone looks for some other thing to attribute their conflict or the impediments that they have. But the other piece too is the bitterness that comes out of wounding that's real. Yeah. And so I would say, as a male advocate for women in ministry, when you encounter someone who's saying, like, trying to justify her place, it's probably a time to figure out what's the wounding behind that, and how do you speak into that. And if it's someone that you're really, like, partnering with somehow, or you have a mentoring role with, then I think you have to encourage them to explore that. Yeah. And that's tough, again, from a man, you being like, so are you just bitter? Is that why you're like this? That's a hard conversation from a guy. However, I think when we tell any ministry leader, like, your most effective, most fruitful ministry and your place of greatest joy is going to be when you minister out of wholeness and health.
Yeah, not out of your hurts.
And so it seems like there's some kind of pain cycle that's going on here for you that maybe
that's good,
could be addressed.
Well, I'll tell you, speaking frankly, I'll try, if I'm working with a particular gal and I want to elevate her, I see promise in her. I don't elevate just any female. If I see somebody with a calling on their life, I see somebody with potential, I go, great, I'm going to help them, I'm going to support them, I'm going to give them opportunities, we're going to craft it. As soon as I start getting the whiff of that bruise, that hurt, as soon as I start getting backlash, like if I give them critique and their response is, well, that's just because I'm a woman, you don't get it, Dave, like that. then I go, okay, I'll try once. I'll give it one honest to God shot once I get that. And after that, I'll just ignore them. And I think I wish there was a better way to help them understand that, like, you just lost your best friend. Like, because I want things for you that you want, that I think God wants for you, but I cannot slow down enough or help you unpack all this stuff about why you need to know, why you got to tell me why I'm a misogynist. I mean, that's like,
but sometimes I think that's the only way. That's the real work of the advocate, whether it's for a woman in ministry or for some other person that's been kind of either hurt or marginalized anywhere, right? It doesn't matter if it's a woman or any other person that's had that experience, then they come into things and it requires often a little bit of extra patience. And I think there were some people that had some extra patience with me while I worked that stuff out. But
that's good.
I also feel like I just doing all of it, the whole thing of saying, like, you have to do this to be obedient to God. So if my constant motivation is obedience to God, when I recognize, like, okay, this person is, I think he's a jerk, and I think he might be a jerk because I'm a woman, then my next question is, so what does it mean for me to be obedient to God in this situation? Like, do I need this? Like, maybe I just say, I don't need to be in partnership or in relationship with this person. Or is God telling me I need to be? And if that's the case, I just need to get beyond the fact that he has a problem with a woman and just get down to business. Yeah. Like, let's just do the thing.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, I think that's the best strategy. And I mean, the thing, I'm a little bit talking out of turn, pulling back the curtain on maleness. But the number one thing that I hear from men who work with women is they go, I just want to talk about the work. Like, I don't want to talk about gender anymore. I don't want to talk about how you feel as a woman, because I don't want to talk about how I feel as a man. I want to talk about, like, what's the project, what's the series, what's the thing. Now, it doesn't mean
that's easy to say from a position of privilege, right? We've been thinking about this when it comes to race too. Let's stop talking about race. Let's just talk about the thing that we're trying to do. It's easy to say from that position.
And it is a position of privilege. And that's why I think, but I also think it's, if it's going to change, if more and more women are going to get opportunity, if more and more women are going to step forward and lead, I think it helps to know what specifically the opposition is. Is the opposition your gender, or is the opposition that the pace is slowed down because we have to talk about gender? And I'm not defending that, but I do think more women would get a lot further, a lot faster if they knew that.
Right.
And it could at least, confront it head on or move past it. And that, you say sometimes God reveals to you that somebody might be a jerk. I go, it's me. It's always me. I'm the jerk. But I want to be less jerky. I want to be more open. I want to divest myself of privilege. I want to use my platform to elevate others. But it's a lot. It's hard.
Yeah, but I think the other thing too, like when you say, I think you use the phrase like get ahead or move forward, and it's like, what am I really trying to do here in ministry? Like, am I trying to get ahead? Am I trying to move forward? Am I trying to be the woman who, I wasn't trying to be the woman who was the lead pastor of the biggest Free Methodist church, like that was not my goal. And I think a lot of times if we're all thinking about in ministry, like, what's my next step? How do I get ahead? How do I get to that next pinnacle of whatever? If it's not God calling us there, then we end up in these situations where it's like we're trying to force our way in as women, for instance. Like whatever. There's like 2 new books out this year from Christian women about like breaking the glass steeple or something.
Oh, really? That's a funny title.
And I think, like, is it my job to break the glass steeple? I don't think so. I think it's my job to listen to God and go where he calls me.
Which I think the net result of that will be breaking the glass steeple.
I think it has in my circumstance here.
Yes, that's absolutely. I do think, too, that there's a... When you think about what is the thing I'm trying to do in ministry, it's the same thing I'm trying to do in life, is to flourish and to be optimized. And I always am uncomfortable when I think about that for myself, like because I think about all of Jesus' right, telling me, narrow is the road that leads to life eternal, broad is the path that leads to destruction. Whoever is not willing to lay down his life for me is not worthy to be called my servant. So I go, well, that doesn't sound like optimization or flourishing. That sounds like self-sacrifice. I'm very comfortable sacrificing for myself. I'm very sacrificing, being self-sacrificial for God. I'm very uncomfortable thinking about my own self-optimization. However, when I think about my kids, then I go, absolutely what I think Jesus wants for my son and my daughter is that they would flourish, that they would function in the full measure of their giftedness, that they would develop their understanding, that they would operate in flow and wisdom and knowledge, that they would be able to exercise their gifts in such a way that God is glorified. I want them to experience abundant life. And I think, I can defend that biblically 6 ways from Sunday in my sleep. Certainly that's the heart of God for his children. So I go, if that's true for them, that's true for me. And that's true for women. That's true for every human. And so I think that's really what I mean by get ahead. That's what we ought to mean by get ahead, is how do we advance, not our position, not how do I get more money or how do I become more important, but how does the Spirit of God flow through me with such efficacy, such ease, such wonder. Yeah, exactly. And boy, do I love seeing that. I don't know that there's a better sense of exaltation for me as a developer of people than when I see the people around me or beneath me experience that. They get in the flow of God's gifts. And you brought up race before. When I see my black friends or my Hispanic friends do that feels amazing. If I have some small part in that feels spectacular. When I feel like I've been able to use my privilege or my platform to see that in women, I feel such relief and such gratitude. Because again, that's what we want to see.
And I think, so kind of stepping back to where we were earlier, for a lot of women, they don't see the examples, they don't see that vision of themselves in certain leadership roles in the church. And so to even, begin to understand or have this dream of this is what God created me to be and do is a little bit more challenging, where, how many, you probably have a better idea, like how many men get into pastoral ministry in their 20s and don't last into their 30s because it was really something like, it seems like, I love Jesus, I love the church, I should do this, but that's not really what God's intent for them was. That's not where the Holy Spirit is going to flow through them in a way where they feel, in the sweet spot of God's design for their life and purpose and all these things. And so I think for women not seeing that, they don't even have a sense, a concept or a dream that maybe that's what God created them to do and gifted them to be. And so that's part of the, just giving people the imagination. I love it when people now tell me, my kids play church and my daughters fight over who's going to be Pastor Kaye.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. Awesome. It can bring a tear to my eye when I hear stories like that.
I so far have no one who said to me, my kids fight over what we're going to play church or they want to be Pastor Dave. I've never,
I bet they have, though. I bet they have.
It's when they come upstairs and they've drawn tattoos all over their bodies. They're like, look, Mom, I'm holy.
I'm holy. Yeah.
What about heroes? Who are the women to whom you look for inspiration?
Oh man, definitely one of my heroes is Danielle Strickland.
I don't know who that is.
Oh my gosh, you have to check her out. So she
is she a writer, preacher?
Yes. So she was part of the Salvation Army. She got saved as an addict by Salvation Army people. Yeah. And then ministered, did a lot of street ministry with Salvation Army, but she just is a gifted communicator. But, just one of those people that you look at and it's like, she's the real deal. She's very humble. And yet, she's been on every main stage, like Catalyst and Exponential. And she's a phenomenal speaker. And she's now, she's left the Salvation Army. Her husband is still a Salvation Army officer, I think. So she's just had her hand in all kinds of cool justice projects and But in terms of someone as a preacher that I can somewhat identify with, I totally like vibed with how she spoke. And, you know, like I can listen to a Christine Kane, who I think is, you know, like just an awesome preacher, but like I will never be like that.
It's not the same flow.
And and there's, you know, because there are fewer well-known models for women to listen to, I just felt, especially 5 years ago, it was a lot harder to find someone and go, oh, see, that's what it could sound like to be a woman who seems genuine in her skin, but also someone I can relate to. And so anyway, Daniel Strickland for sure.
Yeah.
And a couple of years ago, so I don't usually do anything that's just for women. There's a little secret about myself. I'm not a fan.
You don't go to speak at conferences that are just for women. Or you don't,
And I've never had that desire to start like platforming myself for women's conferences and things.
A girl thing. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Like I have men's conferences and stuff.
I thought you were going to say at women's conferences.
I go speak
You probably shouldn't.
Sure, yeah, that's it. They'd be like, do you need a target for your aggression? I can be that for you.
So never been into doing things that were like all women's deals. A couple of retreats here and there for women pastors. And I heard 2 years ago that Daniel Strickland wanted to start a women's speakers boot camp. Basically,
oh, that's cool.
She had been on all these kind of big stage Christian things, and they were always asking her, well, who else is there? We just don't know anybody else. Because she's turning down way more things than she ever does. And so she basically said, I feel like I need to start helping create an awareness of who else is out there, so that when these men who are putting together conferences are trying to find women speakers, it's not so hard. And so she did the women's speakers boot camp. I signed up for the first one. I said to Dave, I really want to go. Like, I really want to go. It's kind of expensive. He's like, go for it. And so there were some things about that time that they definitely did address, you know, like what are some of the hurts that you've had as a woman? And I didn't even expect her to do that, because she's definitely the type that's like, whatever.
Right.
But I think over time, she's just seen the impediments for more women being able to be a part of some of these ministries. So anyway, that for me was a great experience, and it was all women. And I don't normally do that stuff. So like all my coaching has been co-ed groups and anything else. I asked a guy who was 70 to coach my preaching. And man, he was tough. Yeah. And there were times that I was like...
I think cross-gender mentoring is really important, especially because there is, at least functionally, if not theologically, there is functionally a glass ceiling for women. And the Billy Graham rule, where men and women can't be together, I think is really, that's hard for women. Because if they can't get mentored by men, there's not enough females ahead of them to go around. So yeah, that's right, there's zero.
In my context, zero.
So I mean, you know, and we have 3 rules at Westlands for our male-female relationships. It's like it's a triangle model. It said if you're going to have 2 staff members together that are a guy and a gal, then it's only can be in the day, and it's got to be public, you know. So and they got to be accessible. So rather than saying we'll never have a closed door meeting between a man and a woman, or a man and woman can never be in a car together,
right?
Because those things again really they really frustrate women. And it was my female employees years ago, almost a decade ago now, that came to me and said, you know what, Dave, we know that you think you're an advocate for women, but if somebody reports to you directly and they're a man, they get a 2-hour lunch meeting and you guys go and have coffee and you walk around the park. If somebody reports to you directly and they're a woman, then they get 15 minutes in your office and with the door open. And I was like, yeah, because I don't want to go to jail or hell. And so coming up with a new model, which we did a lot of research about that. We read a lot of stuff out of the military, because of course there's male-female relationships in the military.
Right.
And that's what we came up with. If it's daytime, public, and accessible, then you can have those.
So this person is now kind of persona non grata, but John Ortberg.
Oh.
If you Google his guidelines for men and women working together, he does like a 5 or 6 minute video. It is so good. Yeah, I feel like it is so good. It's just like really clear, concise.
I largely, I mean, you mentioned Catalyst and Exponential and here, John Arbor. I've largely abandoned the church as a source for inspiration, both in leadership and in organizational government structure, polity, just because it's like such an echo chamber. You know, I just think the church is moving too slowly for that. What about other great female preachers and leaders? I mean, I know it's silly because everybody either dogs on them or kind of has in a course, but I still like Joyce Meyer, and I still like Beth Moore. I like them both because I think they're such great Bible teachers. Joyce Meyer, of course, not quite a Bible teacher, but I still think she's inspirational.
I've never really listened to Joyce Meyer. Like, if I've seen her on TV, I just kind of go past.
My next door neighbor, when Carmel and I were married, I think it was the first year of us being married, my next door neighbor was a very foul living woman and gave her life to Jesus because she listened to Joyce Meyer.
Yeah.
And that was the hip check for me, where I went, oh, who am I to judge this person who's leading somebody to Jesus that sees me every day of my life, and nothing about my life makes her want to follow Jesus.
Right.
But Joyce Meyer does.
Right.
Okay.
And I think Joyce Meyer had an impact on my mom, who deals with anxiety. And so I think Joyce Meyer has a book that really impacted my mom. So who else do I really like? I like Bianca Olthoff.
I don't know who that is either. What's her name?
Bianca Olthoff. And she is, I forget what she calls herself. She's like Puerto Rican and something else. But she's pretty fiery.
Yeah.
Very funny. You know, it's just really fun to listen to, but there's usually some depth in...
Julian of Norwich. That's the name I didn't remember.
For your mystical experiences.
Yes. Well, there was a word I was trying not to say.
She's not one of my favorite preachers.
Well, no, I know, of course not. I don't think she. All of her experiences with God in prayer, she described in sexual terms. So there was a particular word that I was trying not to use, but it was driving me nuts. So I couldn't.
You came to it.
Yeah.
You know, there's some women pastors who I have enjoyed reading. And I definitely think Beth Moore is, I mean, her voice these last few years has been phenomenal.
Yeah. Nancy Orbert's a great writer. I mean, it's been a long
time, but I read some things by
her.
the
rules of the rubber bands. Although I do, she cites Patrick Lencioni too much. I mean, I've got a mentor, so for years and years after working with Len Sweet, everything I said was Len Sweet this and that. So it takes some time to differentiate. But I always thought Nancy Orber was a very strong leader.
There is a young woman who is at what was Rob Bell's church in Grand Rapids.
Well, Marshall.
Yep. Her name is Ashley Eland. She's now the teaching pastor there.
Oh, really?
And I've listened to her a little bit, and I think
cool.
she's really strong.
She's sharp. That's cool.
Some of, I've read short things, like maybe it was a blog post or something. I don't know, but I just thought, wow, she writes really beautifully.
Like Nadia Boltz-Weber, although I have some critiques of her, I think like many people she wrote a book called Pastrix, which honestly the best part of that book is the name. That's what a hilarious term. But as a tattooed sort of rabble rouser kind of guy, I'm both attracted to and repulsed by other tattooed rabble rousers. Because I like that somebody's going to explore, their own self-expression. I think tattoos have a great spiritual heritage to them, and so I really like those things about Nadia Boltz-Weber, but sometimes I think she overplays the peculiarity card in the same way that so many other tattooed rabble rousers do.
Yeah.
But
I just know who she is, but I don't think I've ever heard her preach.
Yeah, she takes an affectation in her voice that I think is disingenuous. Now, I don't know. I mean, who am I to her? I mean, she's a huge celebrity and she's got a massive following, and I'm none of those things. But I go like, oh, I think you could be more effective. I don't know how much more effective. I mean, maybe she could be as effective as me.
She has the preaching voice.
Yeah. She could reduce her effectiveness by 10,000% and be as effective as me. But yeah, I think that's I have a student, Valerie Crumpton, a former student, who went through the doctoral program in preaching at George Fox Seminary, and I just love listening to Valerie preach. I love it, and she works with T.D. Jakes, who's one of his executive staff members. But she's got that that romantically black thing where she flows between singing and preaching that I honestly I like. Oh, I love it. I eat it up. When I was going through a really difficult time in my life, I reached out to her for a project at Westwinds and asked her to help with something. And she left me a voicemail where she started like getting amped up, and she was kind of preaching on my voicemail and then started singing. And I remember standing in the departure terminal. Oh, I wish I would have kept it. I kept it for about 3 months, but I mean, I stood in the departure terminal at the Kansas City airport, and I sobbed like a baby listening to that voicemail over and over and over again. And because I come from a charismatic background, the concept of the anointing is one that I both love and loathe. But I don't know what else you would call it other than just such anointing. It's just like, this is healing me. This preaching, prophecy, uniquely black, uniquely feminine. It was so, it was so powerful.
Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil.
Okay.
Powerful. She is, she's written 2-3 books at least on racial reconciliation, but she's also preaching at Quest Church in Seattle.
Oh, yeah. That's my Quest Church and New Song Church in LA, Dave Gibbons Church. I think I love Asian churches. I have such the way they do racial integration, it seems miles ahead of everybody else.
I think, Quest is just diverse.
Yeah.
I think right now it's Gail Song Bantam is the lead pastor at Quest.
Okay.
I have never listened to her preach, so I don't know.
No, I've heard her a couple times. Yeah.
And Brenda Salter McNeil just preaches there sometimes. She was like interim before Bantam. And, well, you mentioned T.D. Jakes. Priscilla Shirer is amazing as a speaker.
Yeah.
And, it is just like she's been doing it since she was a baby.
yeah. Like growing up around that, you kind of hope some of it, rubs off. Well, we're about out of time, but I want to say thanks to you, and you're such a great friend to me. And I don't know if anybody would be interested to know this, but you're on the Chapter House board, so
everybody's interested to know.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. But
and they can listen to me preach anytime online.
Yeah, and they should, and they absolutely should. So thanks for being with us, Kaye. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Chapter House podcast. Yeah.